some of with the African wildcat, some of the behaviors, and even sometimes when you've been fortunate enough to see like lions or big cats in the wild, some of the behaviors seem quite similar, like the way that they, domestic cats, as much as we don't like it when they bring, I don't know, things that they've caught, whether it be birds or reptiles or mice, we don't like it that they bring it into the house, but they still exhibit this like wild hunting behavior. Although it might be less so than obviously a wild cat that has to fend for itself, they still exhibit these hunting techniques. And it's quite amazing that they've maintained some of this.
Welcome back to the Animals Around the Globe expedition. Today we're talking about the origin of cats.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Chris. Really, really nice to chat about topics that interest me, and nice to have some fellow cats around for the interview. I think there's one just behind me. Maybe she'll grace us with her presence again. But yeah, cats, we all love them, and maybe a lot of us live with them. But yeah, the sort of evidence of early origin is around 9,000 years ago, so quite long ago. And one of the interesting sort of points is that their ancestor is also it's like the African wildcat. So if you visit, if you're fortunate enough to go on safari in Africa, and again, they're quite difficult to see, is the African wildcat. On the article, there'll be some pictures of this species, and it looks quite similar to the cats that we know, and or those who have them in their house. But they're maybe a little bit bigger. They kind of look a little bit more long-legged, and they sort of have a more brownish color coat with like the stripes, which is obviously to hide themselves, and they're obviously not tamed. But it's really cool that one of their ancestors is still around. This is Pepper.
Oh, wow. So, and so they are originated from Africa. And
Africa. So there's two domestication events that have been proposed. And, one of them is around Africa. The other one is in an area, what we now know to be sort of Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And that's sort of where the evidence has shown us as one of the places of origin. And from there, as they sort of became domesticated and tamed, that people maybe traveled with them on ships. Cyprus has quite a rich history of cats, but in order for them to get there, we had to take them there. And people think that maybe so maybe let me start back to maybe how humans actually domesticated them. And we spoke a little bit about it in the origin of dogs, how humans decided then, what would be beneficial to have this animal around. And they could have been attracted to the food. But it was never really like that they were forcibly bred, if that makes sense. Like they were not, they were around us and they had their babies and they caught pests, but it was not like with goats or with cattle where you enclosed them and chose exactly which ones you wanted to breed. They obviously kept the ones that they liked, but it was a less intensive selective breeding process than in some of the other animals. So I think that's quite interesting.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So like arising from a mutual benefit and then kind of like keeping this and both parties recognized it, right? So
I think so. Yeah. I mean, clearly the cats were clever.
Yeah.
And still are.
Yeah. No, very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the African wildcat, with the African wildcat, some of the behaviors, and even sometimes when you've been fortunate enough to see like lions or big cats in the wild, some of the behaviors seem quite similar, like the way that they, domestic cats, as much as we don't like it when they bring, I don't know, things that they've caught, whether it be birds or reptiles or mice, we don't like it that they bring it into the house, but they still exhibit this like wild hunting behavior. Although it might be less so than obviously a wild cat that has to fend for itself, they still exhibit these hunting techniques. And it's quite amazing that they've maintained some of this element, whereas perhaps a toy poodle is not going to go and hunt for its food.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. That's a big difference to dogs, to a lot of dogs.
For sure. And I'm just thinking what else has sort of stuck out. I mean, for a lot of people, I think we might have like rescue cats, one or two that were popped up on the video earlier. But there are obviously breeds of cats, one of the larger cats being that Maine Coon breed. They're really big cats. They've got quite like a strong jawline. They have these little fluffs. There are also Persian cats that have a slightly more squashed face. So there are obviously cat breeds. But I also read up, and there's an interesting sort of stat that they estimate that there's 600 million cats in the world, which I think sounds like a lot.
That is a lot. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And in some countries, as we investigated, they are also seen as a pest almost, right? And a threat to the local like animals and
Yeah, for sure. I think, unfortunately, if it's the same breed as a general domesticated house cat, it's the exact same species, but they've ended up going back to their like wild roots. Perhaps they were born in a field or whatever, and they've had to fend for themselves. So they are then called feral cats, and they have to hunt, they have to eat. And as we see in that article about the feral cats in Australia, they end up actually wiping out or endangering indigenous populations, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, because there are not many predators for cats anymore, right? Especially in Australia.
Yeah, there must be, with the poisonous snakes, and they actually even have domesticated dogs that have gone wild as well, like almost like feral dogs that are also quite a risk. And I would assume that they would kill and eat a cat, but cats are clever. They climb trees. Yeah. And if they've obviously managed to survive out there, maybe their lifespan is shorter than a domesticated house cat, but they're able to survive.
No, it's interesting. Very clever beings. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, awesome. Is there anything else you would add, or do you think we covered the main points?
I think we've covered the main points. I mean, you can obviously look up, the importance they played in Egypt, to the point where I think people were buried with their cats that they loved and sort of cherished. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's dive into that for a minute. Because in a lot of like pictures on walls and wall paintings in Egypt, cats are always a symbol, right? So
of course,
maybe let's talk about that connection.
Yeah. I mean, I think their relationship obviously also, again, probably born out of a being mutually beneficial. They really liked and appreciated these cats, whether it be the general interaction that they had or that they also killed the mice, but they definitely put out food because, they hung around. And I think there was a case or an article where one of the cats that was buried, and when this was discovered, the cats had healed fractures on its ribs. So the cat may have had an injury, obviously from something. And it's assumed that the owners took care of the cat because it obviously survived these injuries. So perhaps they were feeding it and keeping it sort of more immobile. But obviously in the wild, if that cat had to hunt for its prey with broken ribs, it may have been really sore and wouldn't have been able to fend for itself, because cats are actually solitary animals. So whereas wolves were sort of pack orientated, cats actually in the wild would stay by themselves. So this African wildcat that we spoke about earlier, if you were to see one in the bush in Africa, they're generally on their own. They don't spend time as a pack or a herd or a collection of cats. I think is called a cloud or a clouder. They wouldn't spend time together. They would actually rather be by themselves. So that's quite interesting as well, that someone cared enough for their cat that they made sure that it was fed during its injury.
That's very interesting. Yeah. And in Egypt, were cats seen as holy, or?
My knowledge on religion is not, but I think given sort of the drawings and artworks that were made about them, I think that they did believe them to be of some sort of power. There was a spiritual connection there for sure.
Interesting. Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. That was another very insightful session about cats. And